Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath scratchy wool blankets, duck our heads from the drafty rafters, and try not to breathe in the scent of damp straw and unwashed feet. We're diving into the sad history of sleep, and you, my poor time traveler, are about to discover why you wouldn't last a single day or night in medieval times. Forget memory foam, blackout curtains, or soothing whale sounds. You've just been plunked down in the 14th century, and bedtime is more survival than sanctuary. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into a room that technically qualifies as a bedchamber, though the word feels like a sick joke. You see a low wooden frame stuffed with straw, feathers, or if you're especially unlucky, hay, there's a sour musk rising off it. Something's definitely alive in there, possibly plural. You lean closer and your nose wrinkles involuntarily. That smell, it's the mingling of sweat, mildew, and the generations of bodies who've slept, died, and sometimes been born right on that mattress. There's no Febreze. There's no washing machine. Just a hopeful sprinkling of dried lavender, maybe, and a small wooden bucket under the bed. Yeah, that's for peeing. Don't knock it over. Pillows. Not unless you're rich or blessed. The average villager makes do with a bundled-up tunic or someone else's shoulder. If you're sleeping upright, and many did, especially the sick or noble, you might be propped up with a bolster, which is medieval for lumpy tube of discomfort. And speaking of being noble, if, by some miracle, you're highborn, you'll still need to endure mattresses stuffed with peasants' down straw, rags, even moss. Featherbeds do exist, sure, but they're rare and full of other people's secrets. Royal or not, you're lying in centuries of sweat equity, your blankets woven wool, rougher than a loofah, and just as itchy. It's heavy too, like someone laid a sheep on top of you and walked away. This was intentional. Weight kept in the warmth, and warmth meant survival. Central heating, that's a hallucination from your modern life. A fireplace crackles somewhere, but it's not in your room. Bedrooms aren't for comfort. They're for privacy if you're lucky, and not dying of exposure if you're luckier. Most people sleep in communal spaces, near the hearth. But even then, warmth favors the center, not the edges. If you're sleeping along a wall, prepare to wake up with frozen eyebrows. Oh, and don't let the wooden walls fool you, they breathe. Drafts slither through every crack, caressing your skin with icy fingers. You wrap your cloak tighter and curse the wind. There's no glass in the window, just shutters, closed against the night, but full of holes. Your breath fogs up in the air. You could write sad poetry with it if your hands weren't numb. Historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant considered this normal or miserable. Some sources suggest they were so exhausted from daily labor they passed out instantly, lice and all. Others propose sleep was more fragmented, more anxious because lying still in darkness gave your imagination time to roam, and not in a fun, lucid dreaming way. You tug the blanket higher, trying not to think about the movement you just felt beneath your thigh. Mice maybe, bed bugs definitely, fleas constant companions. One medieval remedy involved leaving a bowl of blood near the bed to distract them. You haven't lived until you fought off vermin with bait bowls. And here's a quirky twist. Beds were often heirlooms, handed down through generations like jewelry. Some even had names. If your family's bed has outlasted 3 plagues and 12 uncles, it becomes practically sacred. You might be sleeping in a frame that's seen more drama than a soap opera marathon. Sleep isn't just a necessity here, it's a battleground. You lie down hoping for rest, but more often than not, you get negotiation with your limbs, with the cold, with whoever's snoring beside you or on top of you, depending on how crowded the room is. Oh right, rooms aren't always divided. In poorer homes, it's one open space. Parents, kids, livestock, yes. Livestock, everyone shares the same oxygen. Try falling asleep while a goat chews cud 5 feet from your face. As you lie there listening to the slow creak of old timber, you start to hear the house settle, or is that something else? Wind rats, your imagination doesn't matter and doesn't. You're wide awake now, and comfort is a fading memory, and you haven't even hit your first waking period yet. But that's for later. For now, really try to sleep. Pull your scratchy blanket tighter. Ignore the itching, the cold, the flicker of shadows across the wall. Breathe deep. You're in medieval times now. And bedtime, it's only the beginning. You jolt awake, heart racing, the room thick with silence and the scent of your own breath. No alarm clock buzzed. No rooster crowed. Your body just knew. This, my time-traveling friend, is not insomnia. It's biphasic sleep, and here in the medieval world, it's perfectly normal. In fact, your sleep was never meant to be one long, luxurious stretch. No 8 hours of uninterrupted slumber like your mattress commercials promise. Instead, you get first sleep, and then, weirdly, second sleep. The awkward middle chunk that's called the watching hour. And you're living it right now. You rub your eyes, groggy but oddly alert. The fire's embers glow faintly across the stone hearth. Shadows curl like lazy cats across the wall. Someone nearby coughs a wet, rattling sound that reminds you there's probably no NyQuil for centuries. It's somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m. Prime time for, well, a lot of things. You might say a prayer, stoke the fire, even pop outside to check on the animals. You might also get up to pee in that ever-charming chamber pot, which you now realize someone already used. Thanks, Jeffrey. But this wakeful break, it's expected. In fact, many people look forward to it. It's peaceful. Still, the world feels paused. A pocket of quiet reflection until the next wave of chores or drama. Some medieval texts even praised this interlude as the perfect time to think. Others, of course, were a little spicier. Love letters, secret trysts, even, you guessed it, bedroom activities happened in this window. Couples whispered in the dark, sneaking closer under those scratchy wool blankets. No judgment here. You've got lice anyway. One 16th century doctor even recommended this period as the optimal time for conception. Apparently, after first sleep, the body was more prepared, whatever that means. Historians still argue whether this belief was based on medicine or medieval wishful thinking. Not everyone used the time romantically. Some lit candles to read religious texts or chant prayers. If you were in a monastery, second sleep was part of a rigid divine schedule. Monks rose in the wee hours to attend matins, one of 8 daily services. They filed into cold chapels half asleep, muttering Latin through chattering teeth. Sleep, for them, was never about comfort. It was obedience. But back to you, you're stuck between slumber and sunrise, unsure whether to roll over or start your day. Outside, it's black as pitch. There are no clocks, no blue light, just moonlight leaking through the gaps in your shutter. And here's the creepy bit: many believe this watching hour was spiritually vulnerable. Demons, ghosts, restless spirits. This was their shift. If you felt uneasy, it wasn't the mice. It was them. You pull the blanket up to your nose and try not to imagine spectral monks gliding past your feet. Some folks use this time to think through problems, maybe even journal if they were literate, which most weren't. But oral storytelling thrived. A mother might whisper an old folk tale to the kids curled up next to her, or a traveler might recall strange happenings from the next village over, tales of witches, banshees, glowing-eyed wolves. No wonder sleep felt optional. You roll over and try to drift off again. But your body's caught in that medieval rhythm. It's not ready for second sleep just yet. So you lie there, drifting, not quite dreaming, not quite conscious. Eventually, the lull returns. Your eyes grow heavy. The wind sighs against the wooden frame of the house. Someone snores gently beside you. Maybe that's a good sign. You settle in for second sleep, which, if all goes well, will last until dawn. But don't get too comfortable. Morning isn't gentle here. You'll rise with the sun, stiff-limbed and scratchy-eyed, maybe with a flea bite or 5. Breakfast will probably be stale bread and sour ale, and the only good morning you'll get is the rooster screaming directly into your soul. Still, this night has shown you something strange, the way people used to move through sleep in pulses. First rest, then wakefulness, then slowly, another descent into slumber, a rhythm we've forgotten, or maybe pushed out with LED lights and midnight scrolling. Who's to say we're sleeping better now? The scholars certainly haven't agreed. Morning arrives like a slap. Not gentle light filtered through gauzy curtains. Not a smart speaker purring out lo-fi beats. Just the cold realization that you're awake, you're still in the Middle Ages, and it's time to move. You stretch or try to. Your limbs creak like a medieval cart. One leg's gone numb under the other. Your back is deeply offended. You sit up, and your blanket clings like it doesn't want to let you go. Maybe it knows what's waiting outside of it. The room is still dark. Light doesn't spill in, it leaks through the slats like a lazy ghost. The fire's long dead. Your breath clouds in the air. There's ice in the water bucket. Literal ice. You swing your legs off the bed and immediately regret it. The floor is colder than heartbreak. There are no slippers, just rough, splintering boards and the vague crunch of something under your heel. Don't ask. Don't look. Even if you've made it to morning without lice bites or frostbite, your misery isn't over. Because sleep quality, that was a luxury most medieval people never tasted. In villages, you didn't wake alone, you woke with everyone. Whole families stirred together, parents, children, and sometimes the neighbors who crashed after too much mead. Noise was inevitable. Snoring, coughing, babies crying, someone already boiling water for the day's first gruel. Privacy was theoretical. And then there were the sounds outside. Roosters, yes, but also livestock shuffling in the attached stable room, dogs barking, bells tolling from the church tower, people yelling across courtyards, even town criers announcing public punishments. You could be brushing your teeth while someone gets dragged to the stocks for stealing barley. You might think city life would be worse, and you'd be correct. Towns were crowded, chaotic, and echo chambers of daily activity. Merchants started early. Smiths fired up their forges before sunrise. And since glass windows were still a rich person's fantasy, the noise came right in. Even the countryside wasn't silent. Wolves howled, wind screamed through poorly built walls, and rats scurried in the thatch overhead like they were late for a meeting. You know that modern phrase, sleep like the dead in medieval times. The dead were actually the lucky ones. Coffins were quieter than peasant homes. Now let's talk about smells, because what wakes you faster than cold air is the aroma. Wood smoke, sweat, chamber pots, and something unidentifiably sour stew together like an early morning soup. You press your tunic to your face. It doesn't help. Your tunic is part of the problem. Bathing. Oh, we'll get to that. But just know people rarely did. The result is that everyone carries a personal cloud of odor, and the collective morning stench could knock out a donkey. And yet, you got some sleep. Maybe not good sleep. Not REM-rich, muscle-repairing, dream-floating sleep. But some. You survived the night. That counts. There were exceptions, of course. If you were high-born, you had more options. Curtains around your bed to block drafts, embroidered pillows, maybe even sheets washed quarterly, if you were lucky. Some aristocrats had separate sleeping quarters, private chambers with fireplaces and servants to stoke them. But even for the rich, sleep was fragile, candles guttered out, rats got bold, and servants often shared the room, lying on rush mats or bundled in corners like forgotten sacks of flour. You were never truly alone. Here's a quirky detail: people often slept with weapons close at hand. A knife under the pillow, a cudgel by the door, especially in cities where break-ins weren't rare and policing was more suggestion than force. The line between slumber and survival was razor thin. Historians still argue whether medieval people valued sleep or simply endured it. Some literature from the era treats rest like a nuisance, something that interrupts work or prayer. Other texts, especially religious ones, frame sleep as dangerously indulgent. Sloth, after all, was one of the 7 deadly sins. Nap too long, and you risked damnation. Sweet dreams, and yet others wrote lovingly of it. Poets mused about sleep as a healing balm, as nature's soft nurse, to quote a guy you'll meet later named Shakespeare. Maybe they were just fantasizing, because for most folks, sleep was like a medieval doctor's appointment, short, confusing, and guaranteed to leave you feeling worse. You pull on your hose and tunic, both still damp from yesterday's sweat and possibly this morning's frost. You yawn, jaw cracking like an old floorboard, and trudge toward the day, but part of you, small and stubborn, already longs for the next time you can collapse onto that terrible, wonderful mattress of straw and sigh into the scratchy darkness again. Because as much as sleep here kind of sucks, it's still your only escape. You stumble out of the bedchamber or what passes for one and immediately collide with someone's elbow, or knee, or possibly both. Because let's be honest, you're not alone in here, sleeping alone in the medieval world. That's a fairy tale. The norm is communal sleeping, and it's exactly as cozy and horrifying as it sounds. You share your bed with your spouse, your children, your cousins, and possibly a few unrelated travelers passing through. Privacy isn't a concept so much as a distant dream. People didn't want to sleep alone. They couldn't afford to. Warmth, safety, and floor space were all more important than personal space. You glance back at the bed you just left and wonder how you fit there at all. It was barely wide enough for 2, yet 4 of you squeezed in, feet to feet, or maybe feet to face, depending on who got in last. Kids are still drooling into the straw as you tiptoe past, careful not to step on someone's braid or someone else's goat. Oh yes, goats, chickens, cats, occasionally pigs. If you lived in a small rural home, your livestock often slept in the same building. The logic was simple: animals equal sign heat, also animals equal sign valuable, and bringing them indoors kept them from being stolen or eaten by something less house-trained. It sounds absurd now, but in the biting chill of an English winter, sleeping next to a cow might just save your life, or at least your toes. Medieval problems require medieval solutions. You dodge a fluttering hen that's decided your blanket is her new nest and look toward the door. Except there is no door, just a curtain or a ragged cloth that does nothing to muffle the morning din. Someone farts audibly in their sleep. You pretend not to hear it. Everyone else does too. This wasn't limited to peasants. Even in castles and manor houses, communal sleep was the norm. Servants often slept on the floor of their master's room. Guards dozed in corridors. Sometimes even noble family members shared beds, not out of necessity, but custom. It showed loyalty, affection, and awkwardly a kind of social ranking. Bed sharing didn't always mean intimacy. In fact, it often didn't. It was a practical arrangement, a way to survive the night without freezing, and if you were traveling, well, inns didn't rent out rooms. They rented out spaces, as in half a bed, maybe a third, if things got crowded. That random merchant snoring beside you tonight, he's not a creep. He's just trying not to die of exposure. One monk traveling in 13th century France complained about sharing a bed with 3 strangers, one of whom had fleas so numerous it was as if the straw itself were alive. Medieval Yelp reviews were brutal. Let's not forget the bugs. You scratch your arm and find yet another bite, red, swollen, and accusing. Bedbugs thrived in the dark corners of straw mattresses and wooden bed frames. Lice made a home in your hair, your clothes, even your eyebrows if they were feeling adventurous. People fought back in creative ways, hanging herbs like rue and mint near the bed, sleeping with garlic under the pillow. Some even lined their mattresses with ash or soot, hoping the pests would be too offended to stay. Spoiler, it didn't work. Historians still argue whether these infestations were just tolerated or considered a genuine nuisance. Some medical texts from the time recommend boiling clothes weekly. Others suggest simply not worrying about it too much. Shrug and sleep. You might think, surely the rich had it better, yes and no. Wealthy folks had canopied beds with curtains to block drafts and insects, but even those beds were shared. Noble children often slept at the foot of their parents' bed. Visiting dignitaries might be offered a spot sometimes right in the Lord's own bed. It was considered an honor, a smelly, snoring, itchy honor. There's one curious exception to all this, the truckle bed, a small roll-away bed that slid under a larger one. Often used by servants, it could be pulled out at night and tucked away by morning. Essentially, it was the medieval pull-out couch, practical, uncomfortable, and surprisingly modern in concept. But even if you did sleep alone, your rest was still haunted by the people around you. Noise traveled, odors traveled faster, and in tight wooden buildings with low ceilings, everything echoed. You lean against the rough wooden wall and listen. Someone's already arguing outside. A baby's wailing in the next room. A donkey brays from what sounds like uncomfortably close proximity. You sigh. You miss your memory foam mattress, your blackout curtains, your noise-canceling headphones. But mostly, you miss silence. Because here, in the world before privacy, sleep is a communal act. You fall asleep surrounded by others. You wake up to their sounds, their smells, their schedules. It's like being in one long, uncomfortable sleepover with people you didn't invite. You blink through the haze of a half-remembered dream and squint at your surroundings, hoping foolishly that the rough straw mattress beneath you has been replaced by something even slightly less spiky. No such luck. You're still here, still itchy, still medieval. But something's different in this room. The bed is enormous, carved from oak so dark it might as well be stone. Thick, embroidered curtains hang from the canopy. The mattress looks thick, plush, even. There's a feather pillow so fluffy you could mistake it for a small sheep. Congratulations, you've leveled up. You're not a peasant tonight. You're sleeping like the upper crust. And let me tell you, their version of luxury is still wildly underwhelming by modern standards. Rich folks in medieval Europe took sleep seriously, at least, in how it reflected their social status. The bed wasn't just for sleeping. It was a stage. It symbolized wealth, legacy, and sometimes the line between life and death. Let's start with the furniture. Unlike the bare frames peasants had, noble beds were often the most expensive object in the house. Canopy beds weren't just pretty, they served a purpose. Curtains kept out drafts, added a layer of relative privacy, and occasionally hid some deeply awkward moments from the servants sleeping nearby. These beds were often passed down through generations, treated like thrones. Some were so massive they had names. Yes, names. Imagine tucking yourself into the grand rest of Elmsworth or Lady Harrow's night throne. Fancy? Yes. Comfortable? Debatable. You stretch out your legs, amazed that they don't dangle off the end. But that's because this bed is elevated. And not just metaphorically. Most noble beds were raised high above the cold stone floor, not just to show off wealth, but to avoid drafts, vermin, and the general grime that blanketed everything below waist level. The elevation wasn't purely practical, it was symbolic. Sleeping up high was dignified, heavenly, even, because you know what else was raised up: altars, thrones, tombs. That's right. In a strange twist, the only places more elaborately decorated than a noble's bed were places designed for the dead, which makes sense when you consider how closely sleep was tied to death in medieval minds. Rest in peace wasn't a metaphor, it was a parallel. People believed dreams could be divine messages or demonic intrusions. Sleep wasn't a biological function. It was a spiritual event. And if you died in your sleep, many thought it was your soul being taken, snatched, or summoned. And speaking of dying, here's your weird fact of the night. More than one noble person planned their death scene in bed like it was a theater production. Entire families were summoned to witness it. Clergy hovered nearby. Final words were rehearsed. The bed itself was often turned toward the east, symbolically aligning with Jerusalem or the rising sun. There were even special deathbeds reserved for this occasion, soft, grand, and utterly final. Historians still argue whether these traditions were driven more by religious doctrine or performative status. But either way, one thing is clear for the rich. The bed was where you were born, lived, prayed, negotiated, got married, and died. No pressure. But not all noble sleep was peaceful. Even the wealthy struggled with cold. Stone walls absorbed every ounce of heat and returned none of it. That's why four-poster beds had not just one set of curtains, but two. One to keep out the cold, another to keep in the body heat. You were basically cocooned in a medieval sleep burrito. And let's not forget the staff. Servants had to prep the bed each night, warming it with heated stones or, if available, metal bed warmers filled with coal. Of course, these sometimes sparked fires or roasted toes. But hey, nothing says comfort like a small burn hazard. Then there were the sleeping arrangements. If you were married, you probably shared the bed, though separate rooms became fashionable in some circles, especially among nobles who preferred their own snores. If you were hosting guests of equal rank, it was polite to share your bed with them. Yes, seriously, that's not to say you couldn't have alone time. But alone time in a noble bedroom was rare. Servants might sleep on the floor. Guards stood outside. And unless you barred the door, someone could always burst in with a torch and a question. You glance at the velvet curtains surrounding your bed and feel both protected and slightly imprisoned. The room is so silent. It echoes your breathing. Somewhere down the hall, someone sneezes. You wonder how many people have died in this bed, or been born, or plotted something. That's the thing about noble beds, they weren't just furniture. They were the backdrop for power plays, political marriages, dramatic illnesses, and quiet betrayals, all done beneath layers of brocade and under watchful, candlelit eyes. You lie back and stare at the carved ceiling. It's beautiful, gilded, and swirling with floral motifs. But it doesn't distract you from the discomfort curling in your shoulder. Feather beds sound magical until they're uneven, and you're allergic to goose down. Surprised still, you're grateful to be off the floor, to be under a blanket that doesn't smell like goat. And if you can just ignore the ancestral ghosts and latent flea colonies, you might even sleep. You wake up suddenly, not from a sound, but from a feeling. The kind of cold dread that seeps in when you know something is just off. The fire's long since died. Your candle burned out hours ago, and yet the room feels occupied. You hold your breath. Is that a whisper? A creak? A flicker of movement just outside the curtain? Welcome to the midnight horrors of medieval sleep. See, in this era, nighttime wasn't peaceful. It was dangerous. And not just in a watch your step on the way to the outhouse kind of way. Medieval people truly believed that the darkness was full of threats, supernatural ones. Forget late night scrolling. Here, your night's entertainment is fear. Real, spiritual, bone-deep fear. Let's talk demons. According to the Malleus Maleficarum, a cheery little 15th century handbook for identifying and prosecuting witches' night demons were everywhere. Chief among them the incubus and succubus, seductive spirits who visited sleeping humans to, well, let's just say they didn't bring snacks. People genuinely believed that evil spirits could enter your bedroom, press on your chest, steal your breath, or worse. Ever wake from a nightmare and feel paralyzed? Medieval folks called that a night hag. You call it sleep paralysis. They called it possession. You hear a thump outside the door and your imagination immediately starts building a narrative. Is it a thief, a ghost, a witch sneaking through the village again? Better keep one eye open. Children were warned not to sleep with their heads turned the wrong way, lest they dream of the devil. Adults tucked amulets under their pillows to ward off spirits. Holy water was sprinkled around the bed like a haunted perimeter. And don't even think about sleeping with your feet uncovered. Bad luck and a ghostly invitation. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were sincere or just bedtime stories taken too far. But if you were lying in the dark after first sleep, listening to the wind howl and the floorboards groan. You wouldn't take any chances either. Even the placement of your bed mattered. Sleep with your head facing the wrong direction. Invite spirits. Sleep during a full moon. Risk dreams sent by witches. And let's not forget the good old don't fall asleep angry, or the devil will use your heart like a chew toy proverb. Cheery stuff. For the religious, nighttime was spiritually loaded. Angels and demons fought invisible battles around your soul while you snored. Dreams were divine messages or temptations. People often recorded dreams in journals or asked priests to interpret them. Because if you dreamed of falling, that wasn't your subconscious. That was hell calling. Some people took extreme precautions. One fringe belief claimed that stuffing your mattress with holy relics or even pages of scripture could block demonic entry. Not ideal for comfort, but excellent for ghost-proofing. You shift in bed, trying not to move too loudly. The curtain rustles slightly, and you tell yourself it's just a draft. But in the back of your mind, a whisper of old folklore curls like smoke. There's the Alp and German tradition, a sneaky little spirit that sits on your chest and feeds on your fear. The mare, from which we get nightmare, was believed to ride sleepers like horses. If you woke up sore and breathless, that was her doing. Quirky fact of the night, some folks believed garlic tucked under the pillow kept away the dead. Others used iron knives, salt circles, or bizarrely upside-down shoes placed by the bed. Sleep wasn't a break. It was a spiritual siege. And then there were the real-world threats, bandits, fires, sudden illness. In towns, wooden buildings could catch fire from one stray candle. Many homes burned down in the night, and people slept light ears tuned to the pop of flame or the shout of warning. Parents often slept with children to protect them not only from cold, but from being stolen. Child abductions weren't unheard of, especially in urban areas, and some communities feared fairies, of all things, swapping their kids with changelings in the dead of night. Don't laugh. They took this very seriously. You lie there, frozen, blanket up to your nose, suddenly aware that the darkness around you is deep, heavier than you remember. Outside, the wind scrapes across the shutters like nails. You think of all the people throughout history who whispered a quick prayer before bed, hoping to wake up. You're doing the same now. Eventually, your breath slows. The fear softens into a dull hum. You remind yourself that ghosts aren't real, probably, that demons are exaggerated, hopefully, and that the bumping sound outside was definitely 100% a chicken. Yep, definitely a chicken. You close your eyes again, but you don't sleep deeply. Not here. Not in a world where the night isn't just a pause, it's a battleground between you and everything lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight. You jolt awake again, not from a ghost or a nightmare this time, but from the sharp, soul-piercing clang of a bell. Loud, repetitive, inescapable. Welcome to your divine alarm clock, the church. It's not even light out yet, but the tolling echoes through the stone walls like a judgment call. If you're a monk, you're already halfway to the chapel. If you're a villager, you're now painfully aware that sleep is over, and God has opinions about your schedule. The medieval world wasn't ruled by Apple Watches or Google Calendar. It was ruled by liturgical time, a sacred, relentless rhythm punctuated by bells. And those bells, they ran your life. You throw your blanket aside and sit up, groaning. In monasteries, the day was divided into 8 canonical hours, starting with matins in the middle of the night. That's right. Your night was officially interrupted on purpose by divine design. Imagine being woken up every single night around 2 or 3 a.m. to chant psalms in a freezing chapel lit only by tallow candles and your fading will to live. Monks did it for spiritual discipline. You, however, would probably do it for 5 minutes and then fake a seizure to get out of it. Monastic sleep wasn't about rest. It was about obedience, asceticism, suffering. Because in this worldview, comfort was suspicious. The less sleep you got, the holier you became. Want sainthood? Try sleep deprivation, even for non-monastics. The church still shaped your sleep habits. Church bells rang out everywhere. summoning people to Mass, reminding them to pray, marking the hours of the day and sometimes the dead. You could be in the deepest stage of REM and suddenly gong. Time to remember your sins. And there were so many sins. Medieval people were taught to fear not just death in sleep, but damnation. Fall asleep angry. Risk your soul. Skip evening prayers. Invite demons into your dreams. Sleep with envy in your heart. Don't be surprised if your blanket feels a little warmer than usual, and not in a good way. You swing your legs off the bed, now wide awake, and shuffle toward the main room where others are already mumbling morning prayers. Your joints ache. Your head feels like it's packed with wool. But prayer is mandatory. Skipping it could mean social shame or worse, spiritual peril. One quirky tidbit here, some churches even employed wakemen, literal humans, whose job was to knock on windows or call out at appointed times so folks didn't miss Mass or work. Imagine hiring someone just to be the medieval version of snooze. And speaking of Mass, those services weren't exactly espresso shot energizers. Long, in Latin, and conducted standing up, often in freezing churches. No pews, no cushions, just you, your stiff knees, and the creeping realization that you'll need a nap you definitely won't get. You glance around the room and see a few others blinking through their fatigue. Children, elders, farmers, all trying to keep their heads up during morning devotions. Everyone's tired, but nobody says it, because being tired here is normal. It's expected. Historians still debate just how central religion was to the average villager's sleep pattern. Some argue that church bells and holy days carved deep routines into daily life. Others suggest that people tuned them out unless they had to attend. Either way, the church's presence loomed over every hour, especially the quiet ones. Even dreams weren't safe. If you had a particularly strange or vivid one, you might consult a priest or a local wise woman. Was it a message from God, a warning, a test? Entire books were written on dream interpretation, with symbols cataloged like cosmic emojis. Dreamed of flying might be pride. Dreamed of fire could mean lust. Dreamed of cheese. You might just be hungry, or possibly a heretic. In noble homes, chaplains often lived on site to oversee morning prayers and nighttime confessions. Some lords refused to go to sleep without first repenting, because if they died in their sleep well, you wanted to meet St. Peter with a clean ledger. And death in sleep wasn't just a poetic idea, it happened, often. Illness, accidents, mysterious visitations during the night. It's no wonder people clutched crosses and whispered prayers before closing their eyes. The fear was real, and the theology was intense. You mumble along with the morning prayer, pretending to remember the Latin, something about forgiveness, light, grace. Your eyes flutter shut mid-sentence, but you jolt back up, catching the judgmental stare of someone nearby. Sleep during prayer? That's suspicious behavior, demonically suspicious. If you believe the wrong rumors, once the prayer ends, people shuffle off, some to fields, some to kitchens, some back to bed if they're lucky, but sleep real, uninterrupted, peaceful sleep. That's for heaven. Maybe. You stagger back to your straw mattress, more exhausted than when you woke up. The bell has stopped. The room is quiet again. You lie down, heart still thumping, blanket up to your chin. The church has called, you answered. And now you're free for a few hours to try sleep again. Just don't forget your soul on the way back down. You wake up groggy, blinking against the dull gray of another medieval morning, and you're hit by a scent so dense it nearly achieves physical form. It's earthy, sharp, fermented, a little like boiled cabbage, a lot like regret, and then it hits you. You stink. So does everyone else. And now you realize why sleeping in medieval times wasn't just hard, it was filthy. Hygiene wasn't a luxury here, it was practically a rumor. In your modern life, you might roll out of bed and into a steamy shower, emerging fragrant and alert. In medieval Europe, that concept might as well be wizardry. You rub your eyes and glance toward the basin in the corner, a wooden bowl with water that's at least 2 days old. You splash some on your face. It's freezing, slightly murky, and filled with floaters that may or may not be a bug. You've officially washed up. Bathing in this world is complicated. Medieval people did bathe, but not the way we think of it. Full-body immersion was rare, and when it did happen, it was usually in public bathhouses. That's right, public, as in you and a dozen of your closest strangers soaking in the same giant soup of humanity. If you're a peasant, though, you might bathe once a season, maybe twice if you're scandalously clean, and washing your entire body. That's a process involving heated water rare, privacy non-existent, and time, which brings us to sleep. You don't climb into bed fresh and clean here. You drag the day in with you mud, manure, soot, and sweat all tucked under the blanket with a grimy little bow. That same tunic you worked in, you'll probably sleep in it too. And don't forget you're sharing this bed, which means you're not just marinating in your filth, you're all stewing together. A sensory experience somewhere between a locker room and a campfire that ran out of soap 3 centuries ago. This is where things get weird. People at the time genuinely believed that bathing could be dangerous. Yes, dangerous. The logic was that hot water opened your pores, which let bad air in, miasmas, evil vapors, maybe even sins. And if that happened, boom, plague, or at least a nasty chill. Historians still argue whether this belief was widespread or simply a post-plague precaution. Some suggest that people stopped bathing as often after outbreaks of disease, convinced that water did more harm than good. Others say that folks were always kind of smelly and just leaned into it. What we do know is that the few who could afford private bathing did it with flair. Nobles had giant wooden tubs dragged into their chambers, filled with buckets of heated water, and perfumed with rose petals or herbs. Sometimes they even added milk or wine like some kind of medieval spa day. But even then, water was reused. The Lord bathed first, then the lady, then the children, then the servants. By the time the 5th person stepped in, the tub was less refreshing soak and more lukewarm soup. And if you were unlucky enough to fall asleep in the bath, well, you risked dampening the humors, which could lead to a violent imbalance and, yes, death, at least according to Galenic medicine. One quirky tidbit in some towns, bathhouses doubled as brothels. So a visit to get clean sometimes came with a heavily implied side quest. This blurred the lines between hygiene and sin even further. It didn't help the church's opinion of frequent bathing, which is how we get to tonight's situation. You're lying in bed, crusty from yesterday, itchy in places best left unmentioned, and dreaming of a shower that won't exist for several hundred years. The pillow smells faintly like sheep and faintly like someone else's breath. Your hair is greasy enough to fry an egg. You long for soap, not the modern kind, either just anything. Medieval soap was a mix of animal fat and lye. It burned your eyes, stripped your skin, and left you smelling like a damp fireplace. But hey, it was better than nothing. And let's talk about feet. Everyone's feet were disgusting, cold, calloused, unwashed, covered in cuts and blisters. You didn't remove your shoes casually because you knew what was under there. Even you didn't want to see it. The bed itself, a breeding ground. Straw mattresses trapped dirt, lice, old food crumbs, and whatever mystery liquid seeped in from chamber pots or overturned mugs. You didn't wash the bed. You occasionally aired it out, which meant propping it up by a window and hoping the sun scared the mildew away. And yet, people slept. They somehow found peace in the grime, maybe because everyone was equally filthy, or maybe because when your days are hard and your nights are harder, your brain just shuts off out of self-defense. Still, you can't help but crave a bar of soap, a washcloth, a toothbrush, or any brush, really. Because as you curl into your lice-infested blanket, with someone's sour breath in your ear and yesterday's sweat still sticking to your skin, you finally understand the medieval world wasn't just hard to sleep in, It was hard to survive without itching yourself into madness. You're lying awake again because someone's stomach is growling loud enough to rattle the bed frame. It takes you a second to realize it's your own. That's the thing no one tells you about sleeping in the Middle Ages sometimes. You couldn't sleep because you were starving. Tonight's dinner was more suggestion than sustenance. A crust of bread so hard it could double as a weapon. Some onion. Maybe a bit of ale, if you were lucky. A ladle of thin pottage, that beloved slurry of grains, herbs, and wishful thinking. You roll onto your side, trying to ignore the ache in your belly. But food isn't just a daytime problem. It haunts your nights. And if your stomach's empty enough, sleep feels impossible. Enter the strange and varied world of medieval bedtime snacks. The air quotes are doing a lot of work here. Let's start with the basics. People didn't have the luxury of a fridge raid. No cheese sticks, no midnight peanut butter, no 7-Eleven runs. Most food was locked away, or already spoiled, or had to be cooked to be edible again. And no one's lighting a fire at midnight unless they want to wake the dead and maybe get accused of witchcraft. So what did people eat or drink to help them sleep? Herbs. Lots and lots of herbs. A mug of warm ale might be steeped with chamomile or valerian root. Both were believed to calm the nerves and encourage the humors toward rest. Modern science agrees, sort of. Valerian can help. Chamomile's still a hit, but don't expect a dreamless sleep. This is more drift off eventually than lights out in 5. Then there was lettuce. Yes, lettuce. Some medieval doctors recommended boiled lettuce water before bed as a gentle sedative. Think of it as the sad ancestor of NyQuil without the minty flavor or guaranteed results. Historians still argue whether these remedies were genuinely effective or simply a placebo with seasoning. But hey, when your other option is untreated insomnia, you'll take what you can get. Quirkier remedies included stuffing your pillow with hop flowers, sniffing rosemary, or tying mugwort to your leg. Mugwort, in particular, was believed to cause vivid dreams, sometimes even prophetic ones. If you wanted to talk to angels in your sleep, mugwort was your herb. If you just wanted to sleep without picturing the end of the world, maybe skip it. But herbs weren't the only nighttime consumption. Some folks believed eating heavy foods before bed, cheese, beans, thick stews would cause nightmares. So instead of chasing sleep with a snack, they avoided food altogether, hoping to sleep light and dream soft. Of course, this didn't always work. Hunger kept you awake. Or, worse, woke you up. And not just hunger for food, hunger for meaning. Fear of what your dreams might show you. Anxiety over what tomorrow might bring, especially if tomorrow involves a tax collector, a sick child, or a neighbor whispering that your cow gave her the evil eye. Sleep was never just sleep. It was a battleground between your body and your mind, your belly and your beliefs. And sometimes, it was just about finding anything to make the night easier. One fringe belief suggested placing a small piece of bread under your pillow to absorb evil thoughts. Others said putting salt near your bed would keep spirits and dreams in check. Neither worked, obviously, but people swore by them. You sit up now, stomach still growling, and reach for the scrap of bread tucked into your satchel. It's dry. It crumbles as you bite it, but it gives you something to chew, something to do. You wash it down with a sip of room-temperature ale flat. Bitter, but strangely comforting. For a moment, your hunger retreats. Not gone, just distant. You lie back down, the blanket scratching at your arms, and think about the people who slept like this every night, who whispered prayers not just for peace but for bread, who dreamed of tables overflowing with meat and honey, only to wake with an empty bowl and a colder bed. And yet, they endured. You close your eyes again. The ache in your belly is dull now, manageable. You can't remember the last time you felt full, but maybe tonight, you'll dream of feasts, of warm bread, melting butter, roasted apples, and dripping honeycomb. Maybe, just as long as the mugwort doesn't kick in first. You wake to muffled shouting, not the angry, barked orders of a soldier or the cheerful din of morning markets. This is different. Lower, urgent, personal. Someone's arguing in the next room, and you're still in bed. Because in the medieval world, the bed isn't just for sleeping, it's for living, and sometimes for fighting. You pull the rough wool blanket tighter and strain your ears. You don't catch every word. But it's clear this is a dispute about land, or money, or marriage, or all three, and it's happening right next to your mattress. Welcome to the bed as battleground. Let's be very clear, the medieval bed was less a private sanctuary and more a dramatic, multifunctional stage. It was where people gave birth, where they died, where they were nursed through fevers, exorcised of demons, interrogated by clergy, and yes, where political marriages were consummated, often with witnesses. We'll get there. For now, you lie there in your creaky bed and realize this whole setup is less about sleep and more about status. In noble households, the bed wasn't just furniture, it was a throne you laid down on. Think of it like the modern office, except with fewer spreadsheets and more bloodlines. You see, marriage among the nobility wasn't about love. It was a power transaction, brokered between families with titles, land, and heir production in mind. And once the deal was struck, it wasn't final until the couple had been seen or at least strongly believed to have, sealed it in bed. This moment was often public, not in the live audience sense, but witnesses, sometimes clergy or family, might be present in the room, offering blessings or keeping a very awkward eye on things to confirm consummation occurred. Imagine your honeymoon starting with polite clapping and someone taking notes. Sleep? Yeah, not happening. The pressure was real. Without a consummated marriage, inheritance lines could be challenged, lands could revert to the crown, and if the union wasn't fruitful in the first few years, fingers started pointing. Was the bed ever truly blessed, they'd ask? Or did the marriage end at the altar? It wasn't just about noble heirs, though. In peasant homes, the bed was also the center of family life. Arguments between spouses often happened here after the children fell asleep or pretended to, under blankets, whispered with fury and fatigue, and when tensions flared, they stayed flared. Divorce, as we know it, didn't really exist for most people. Separation was rare and scandalous. You fought it out or gave up in that same straw-stuffed mattress, night after night. One quirky tidbit: some legal disputes were settled in bed. In certain traditions, if a husband and wife refused to share bed and board, they could be publicly shamed or fined. If a woman could prove her husband abandoned the marital bed, it might even justify annulment. The bed, in a very literal sense, made the marriage. It also ended them. Think of all the nights people lay side by side, no longer speaking, one rolling to the wall, the other silently crying. In castles, in cottages, in cramped inns with strangers curled at their feet. The bed was where bitterness settled in like another blanket. Historians still argue whether the bedroom was truly considered private in medieval society. The evidence is mixed. Some records suggest couples were rarely alone, even in bed. Others hint at stolen moments, quick affections in the dark, fleeting and fierce. But the boundary between public and private was blurred. Children watched their parents from across the room. Servants slept nearby. In larger households, gossip moved faster than fire, especially when it originated between two bedposts. Of course, not every night was dramatic. Sometimes, the bed was a safe place, a whispered comfort, a moment of warmth in a freezing world, a hand held in silence, not conflict, but even then, it was never just a bed. You shift under the covers and glance toward the corner, where last night's argument has faded into murmurs. Someone cries quietly. Someone else sighs. And still, sleep doesn't return. Because this wooden frame, this itchy blanket, this lumpy mattress, they're not neutral. They hold the weight of love, resentment, desire, duty, hope, and exhaustion. You're not just resting your body. You're lying in history. Eventually, the room quiets. The embers glow again. The tension cools like iron taken off the forge. You close your eyes and let the weight of the bed pull you down, not just physically, but emotionally, because sleep in the Middle Ages was never separate from the life around it, and sometimes it bore the burden of every word left unsaid. The wind howls against the shutter again, but tonight, it's different, sharper, hungrier. You pull the blanket tighter, not for warmth, but for protection. Because tonight, sleep isn't just hard, it's dangerous. You're in the depths of winter now. The fire's long gone out, and it's so cold your breath curls like smoke in front of your face. The air stings your nostrils. Every inhale feels like swallowing glass, and your stomach is empty. Again, you didn't get much to eat today. Some root vegetables, a bit of barley, maybe a hunk of turnip that tasted suspiciously like dirt. It's not enough. It never is this time of year. Welcome to the long, bitter reality of sleeping through starvation. The medieval agricultural cycle wasn't kind. Harvests came once a year, and if the crop failed, so did your chances of a comfortable winter. By January, cellars were near empty. Salted meats were reserved for special days, if you had any at all. And bread, when you could get it, was often stretched with sawdust, mashed beans, or crushed acorns. Spoiler, your body hates all of those. And in this season, nightfall doesn't just bring rest, it brings fear. Fear of what will or won't be on the table tomorrow, of livestock dying in the cold, of waking up weaker than you are now, or not waking at all. Hunger doesn't just haunt your stomach, it crawls into your sleep. You dream of food-roasted meat, bubbling stew, fresh milk, and then snap awake, more miserable than before. It's a cruel trick of the brain, teasing you with what it knows you need but can't provide. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants consistently faced famine every winter or if it varied more by region, but evidence is strong that lean months were common. The hungry gap. They called it the late winter lull between stored food running out and fresh crops coming in, and during that time sleep was a game of survival. Your body slowed. You shivered more. You moved less. Every ounce of energy had to be conserved. Some families even huddled in bed all day, not from laziness, but sheer necessity. The bed became a shared oven, a last defense against the creeping cold. Of course, warmth didn't mean comfort. That straw mattress has long since flattened into a lumpy quilt of misery. You shift, trying to find a softer patch. There isn't one. You listen. Outside, wolves howl, real ones, starved and bold. Winter made predators desperate. There are tales of them sneaking into villages, attacking livestock, even humans. You remember hearing about a child taken from a doorway not 10 miles from here, and so you stay still, so still. And if not wolves, there's cold itself, frostbite. It's not a medical term yet, but you know what it is. Fingers that go blue, toes that don't come back. People lose limbs every year, some lose everything. This is the part of medieval life the poems don't glamorize, the long, drawn-out suffering, the slow, gnawing ache of starvation that steals your sleep, your strength, your hope. Quirky fact. Some folks believe that sleeping with a stone under your tongue helped curb hunger. Others tied belts around their stomachs to trick the body into feeling full. Herbal teas, if available, were sipped slowly to warm the belly. Warmth became the poor man's meal. You reach over and touch the wall. It's coated in ice. Not metaphorical frost, actual ice. Your home is freezing from the inside out, and it's still weeks before spring. You glance across the room. Everyone's wrapped in silence and wool. Faces tucked under blankets. Motionless. Whether they're asleep or just pretending, you can't tell. But the air is heavy with the same thing weighing on your chest: hunger, fear, and exhaustion. And yet, they sleep. You do, too, fitfully. Not because you want to, but because the body demands it. Even in misery, you must rest, because tomorrow you'll have to carry water, chop wood, maybe bury a chicken, maybe a neighbor. There's no sleeping in during winter, only sleeping through it. You turn onto your side. A mouse skitters by. You don't even flinch. If you had the energy, you'd try to catch it for dinner. Instead, you close your eyes and try to picture spring. Green fields, warm sun, real bread. You don't believe it yet, but you try. Because in the medieval world, sleep wasn't a retreat from hardship. It was hardship, but also, somehow, the only way to survive it. You shift in bed, barely awake, and suddenly your heart lurches. There's something warm pressed against your chest, a tiny weight, a faint wheezing breath. It's a baby, not yours, but someone's, swaddled, fussy, and now gently drooling on your tunic. You lie completely still, afraid to move, afraid to wake it, afraid to crush it. Because in the medieval world, sleep wasn't just a personal risk. It was a family affair, and sometimes a fatal one. Co-sleeping wasn't a parenting choice back then. It was the default. Cribs were rare, bassinets rarer, and separate nurseries, forget it. If you had a baby, that baby slept with you or on you. Warmth was everything, especially in cold seasons, and no one wanted to get up in the night to walk across a freezing, pitch-black room to comfort a crying child. So, infants slept where the heat was in their parents' arms, on the same mattress, under the same wool blanket that already itched enough for 10 people. It sounds sweet until it's not. There are haunting records of medieval parents waking up to find their newborns silent, still, and cold. The causes weren't always known, but the fear of overlaying, accidentally smothering a child in your sleep was real and ever-present. It even shows up in 13th century coroner's reports and church penitential texts. You glance down at the baby curled against you now, its fingers twitching in a dream. You won't sleep. Not deeply. Because deep sleep could mean not waking up if something goes wrong, not noticing the child squirming beneath your elbow, not realizing the blankets crept over its face. The idea of sudden infant death wasn't understood medically, but culturally. They knew it happened, and that it happened in bed. To prevent it, some parents tied themselves in position, literally bound their arms or legs with cloth so they wouldn't roll over. Others placed wooden boards between themselves and the baby, or laid the infant higher up in the bed, closer to the pillow than their own body. But here's the cruel twist: all of those strategies introduced new dangers. Babies could fall, get stuck between the wall and mattress, or freeze from being too far from body heat. It was a nightly gamble, every single time. One quirky belief in some parts of Europe, it was said that fairies or spirits could steal healthy babies in the night and replace them with sickly, silent changelings. If a baby died unexpectedly, this superstition offered an explanation, one that placed the blame somewhere other than the terrified, grieving parents. Historians still argue whether these stories were coping mechanisms or rooted in deeper spiritual fears. Probably both. Because how else do you explain the unimaginable: a child gone overnight, and no sign of what went wrong? The risk didn't stop with babies. Elderly family members often shared the bed too, especially if they were sick, frail, or dying. The same bed might cradle a newborn 1 month and a feverish grandfather the next. People didn't separate the cycles of life. They folded them in, stacked like firewood, into the same small space. If someone died in the night, the body often stayed in bed until morning, sometimes longer. You didn't just get up and move a corpse. You had to send for a priest, a neighbor, someone with a cart. In the meantime, you kept sleeping beside the body or tried to. You shift again and feel the straw poke your back through the mattress. Across the room, another child coughs in their sleep. A wet, hollow sound that makes you wince. Illness spreads fast here. One sick kid means the whole family will be sneezing by week's end if they're lucky. You wish there was space, a separate room, a cradle, a clean floor, but there isn't. You're all in this together, huddled like spoons in a drawer, praying for warmth, for silence, for no bad dreams. And still, sleep comes, not deeply, not restfully, but out of necessity, out of the body's desperate need to shut down for just a little while. Because parenting in the Middle Ages didn't stop when the sun set. If anything, The pressure increased. Keep the baby alive. Keep the fire burning. Don't roll over. Don't oversleep. Don't ever close both eyes at the same time. Eventually, the child in your arms sighs. Its tiny head sinks against your shoulder. You don't dare move. Your muscles ache. Your neck's twisted at an awkward angle. But you stay still. Because here, in this freezing, overcrowded, lice-ridden room, you're the blanket now. And that's the only thing keeping this little one alive. You jerk awake to the sound of metal clinking slow, deliberate, unnervingly close. Your eyes snap open. And for a split second, you don't remember where you are. Then it hits you a cold draft. The smell of leather and steel, and the crushing weight of something unfamiliar across your chest. Armor. You're sleeping in your chainmail tonight. Why? Because you're on duty, or on the move, or maybe, just maybe, you're in a castle under threat. And in the medieval world, soldiers didn't get rest, they got readiness. No cozy beds here. You're sleeping on stone, or packed dirt, or, if you're lucky, a heap of cloaks layered over straw. You roll over and immediately regret it. Your shoulder plate jams into your neck, and the links of your mail shirt bite into your side. It's like napping inside a medieval toolbox. Welcome to the brutal, bleary world of sleeping like a soldier. Whether you're a knight in service or a foot soldier drafted into duty, sleep is now something you steal, not schedule. A nap between patrol shifts, a doze while the catapult team resets. An hour behind a shield wall while the commander debates tactics, because war didn't wait for you to be rested, and castles didn't hold forever. Every creak, every torch snuffed by wind, every distant shout could be the beginning of an ambush. You sleep lightly, one eye open, hand on your sword or dagger, depending on your rank. The phrase sleeping with one eye open wasn't poetic flourish. It was standard operating procedure. Even on long campaigns, sleeping arrangements were grim. Tents, when available, who were shared and drafty. Men crowded together for warmth, much like in village homes. Horses snorted nearby. Armor clanked in the dark. And the ground, no matter how many cloaks you stacked, was never comfortable. And forget about taking it off. Chainmail was precious. You didn't remove it casually, especially if you were encamped near hostile territory. Removing it meant vulnerability. So you'd sleep in it, sweat in it, live in it. And let's talk about marching. Imagine walking 15 to 20 miles a day in full armor, carrying weapons, rations, maybe a shield, and then being told to get some rest on the cold earth. You collapse from exhaustion, not comfort. Historians still debate how common it was for knights to sleep fully armored. Some argue it was impractical and unhealthy, leads to sores, back injuries, and dehydration. Others insist it was necessary, especially in enemy territory or during sieges. Quirky fact, some military manuals actually included tips for camp sleeping, like placing your sword within reach, using your cloak to cover exposed armor joints to prevent freezing or rust, and rotating sleep shifts to make sure someone always had an eye on the horizon. You blink in the dim firelight, ears straining. The man next to you snores loudly, he must be new. The veterans sleep silently, shallow breaths, no movement, like animals trained to fake death. You try to shift, but your armor pinches again. It's made for standing tall, not curling up. You wrap your arms around your helmet, using it as a makeshift pillow, despite its cold, hard rim pressing into your cheek. And still, you sleep. Kind of, not deep, not safe, but enough to keep your muscles from seizing, your brain from slipping into madness. You drift in and out half alert, heart pounding at every noise. And that's the best case scenario, because sometimes soldiers couldn't sleep. During sieges, sleep deprivation was a tactic. The enemy might pound the walls at intervals, just enough to keep you from resting, or light fires nearby, or, in the worst cases, launch corpses over the walls to spread disease and panic. Sleep became a privilege, a prize, something doled out in slivers. 5 minutes here, 10 there. Some veterans claimed to fall asleep while standing. Others tied themselves to posts or leaned against trees, helmet tilted, snoring upright. And then there were the battlefield overnights. After a bloody skirmish, you didn't get a shower and a hot meal. You sat, wounded, shivering, surrounded by the dead. The moans of the dying made sure your dreams weren't far off from the waking world. You might share a bedroll with someone you didn't know, or didn't like, or were assigned to guard. And the rule was simple sleep with your sword touching your skin, just in case. Even off the battlefield, soldiers assigned to castles often slept on high alert. Guards rotated through the night. The inner gate had to be checked. The watchtower climbed. Every few hours, you'd be shaken awake by a gruff voice and a candle stub. Your turn. You nod and stumble through the motions. You live in a rhythm of rust and fatigue. But despite it all, there were small mercies. A hot drink wine, if you were lucky. A dry cloak, a kind word from a captain. These things bought you rest, or at least the illusion of it. Eventually, your eyes slip closed again. The stone beneath you hasn't gotten softer. The cold hasn't faded, but your body, trained by exhaustion and necessity, gives in. You sleep, and hope the horn doesn't sound before sunrise. You're home again, sort of. At least, you're not sleeping in chainmail or on the frozen ground anymore. But now, you're lying flat on your back, staring up at the rafters, wondering whether the cure the village healer gave you for your sleeplessness is slowly turning your liver into soup. Because if you were unlucky enough to suffer from insomnia in the Middle Ages, you didn't get a prescription for melatonin. You got a lecture on your humors and possibly a bowl of boiled lettuce water or a session of good old-fashioned bloodletting. Yep, welcome to the surreal world of medieval sleep science. You roll over and groan. Your head still feels thick from the valerian root infusion you were given earlier, a thick, bitter brew that was supposed to calm the vapors rising to your brain. All it seems to have done is make your tongue feel like wood and give you a dream involving dancing goats. In the Middle Ages, medicine wasn't about symptoms, it was about balance. The body, people believed, was ruled by four humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. When those were in harmony, you slept soundly. When they weren't chaos, so if you couldn't sleep, it wasn't because of stress, anxiety, or blue light from your torch, though. That would be impressive. It was because your humors were doing something dramatic. Too much black bile. You were melancholic. Too much phlegm. Maybe you were cold and sluggish. The solution: a leech on the forehead, or a sharp little knife near your ankle, or a blistering agent applied to the skin to draw out the heat. All perfectly logical. Right. Historians still argue whether most people truly believed this worked or if they simply had no better options. But judging by how often these treatments appear in medieval medical texts, the faith was strong and the blood loss frequent. You sit up and look at the wooden shelf beside your bed. There's a small pouch of dried poppy seeds, a clove of garlic, and a scrap of parchment with a Latin charm written on it. For sleep and the warding off of spirits. The healer said, "You're not sure whether it's doing either." One quirky and mildly horrifying sleep remedy from the period involved a poultice made from crushed harebrain mixed with wine. Apply it to the soles of your feet before bed, and supposedly dreams would come easily. You're tempted to ask who was the first person to try that and what went so wrong in their life. Others swore by boiled lettuce, which was believed to have cooling properties, calming hot-headedness and soothing the heart. Sound familiar? It's actually not completely wrong. Lettuce contains compounds with sedative effects, but the dosage, the preparation, and the side effects, let's just say medieval pharmacology wasn't known for its precision. And then there were the talismans, little pouches of herbs, bones, or written prayers hung over beds to induce calm or chase away nightmares. Some slept with their heads facing east, others west, depending on what ailment plagued them. Some even changed sleeping position to affect dreams. Lying on your right side invited good visions. Your left, more ominous ones. You lie back down, Remembering what the old woman said this morning, the devil steals thoughts at midnight. Best to sleep before then. You tried. You really did. But the more you try to sleep, the more your mind wanders. You remember how the apothecary warned you not to take too much of that herb you might not wake up. Then again, some people wanted that. Eternal rest was a popular euphemism, especially for those suffering from chronic illness or grief, and not all sleep was seen as good sleep. Nightmares were considered spiritual symptoms, a sign of sin or of evil trying to creep into your heart. If you dreamed of falling, you might need confession. If you dreamed of fire, penance. If you dreamed of something pleasant, well, better not talk about that. It could mean you'd been tempted. Sleepwalking was even worse. You weren't just having an odd night, you might be possessed, or cursed, or a witch. People were sometimes punished for it. Of course, the church had remedies too. Holy water. Psalms recited before bed. One particularly devoted monk claimed that reciting the book of Psalms every night was the key to peaceful slumber. Another recommended sleeping on a hard surface to avoid temptation and dreams entirely. Still, not everyone suffered. Some just fell asleep, snored, dreamed of clouds and apples, woke up rested, probably farmers, probably the ones who didn't drink the valerian ale cocktail. You stare at the thatched roof above, watching a small spider lower itself on a nearly invisible strand. You're tired. Your body aches, but your mind buzzing with prayers, prescriptions, and a slight headache from the garlic you chewed before bed is still alert. Eventually, the darkness thickens. The room grows quieter. You feel yourself slipping under. Slowly, hesitantly. Maybe the charm worked after all. Maybe the poppy did its job. Or maybe your body, despite everything, knows when it needs to shut down. You exhale, long and low, and let go. Just try not to drool on the hairbrain. You open your eyes just before dawn. Again. But this time, something feels different. The air is still damp, the bed is still unforgiving, and someone's still snoring just a few feet away, but it's quiet. Deep quiet. Not the kind that threatens, but the kind that listens. And in this final moment of half-sleep, you realize something odd for all the misery of the medieval night. Some part of it still feels familiar, because here, even with your modern brain and your 21st century sleep schedule, you recognize the echoes, tiny fingerprints of a time long past. Let's start with the obvious. We still don't sleep all that well. Sure, your mattress might have memory foam and your pajamas might be bamboo fiber and breathable, but the rhythms are still broken. You check your phone in the dark. You jolt awake at 3:00 a.m. No candlelight needed. You drink your calming tea and hope your mind will just shut up for once. Sound familiar? Historians have unearthed all sorts of evidence suggesting that we moderns might still carry remnants of the biphasic sleep pattern, the first and second sleep from medieval times. In fact, some sleep scientists argue that waking in the middle of the night isn't a disorder at all. It's just natural, leftover, ancient. You sit up in bed now, the straw mattress rustling beneath you, and think about your own sleep habits. The late-night scrolling, the middle-of-the-night existential crises, the 5:00 a.m. alarm you snooze 3 times. It's all so high-tech, and yet, somehow, it's not that different. Quirky fact. Some of our most common bedtime rituals still echo medieval ones. Herbal teas. They had them too, though yours probably doesn't contain crushed beetles or boiled turnips. Bedside prayers now called affirmations, maybe, or meditation. Sharing a bed, still pretty normal, even if you now call it co-sleeping and nobody's stealing your socks while they dream. Even the idea of sleep being haunted by guilt or judgment that's alive and well. Only now it's not about the 7 deadly sins, it's about whether you've been productive enough, hit your step count, stayed off social media after 10 p.m. The ghosts have changed, but they still climb into bed with you. You roll onto your side and look around this room, a medieval sleeping space, scratchy and cold. with lice and straw and no privacy, and you realize how much it shaped us. The sleep we want now is just a reversal of what we suffered through then. We long for softness because they had none. We worship blackout curtains because they had no control over the moonlight or the night watch. We crave silence because they slept in crowds and cried quietly into the dark. Modern sleep hygiene. It's really just an elaborate apology for what our ancestors endured for centuries. The sound machines, the sleep tracking rings, the ASMR, they're all love letters to what sleep could have been if you weren't sharing your bed with 6 people and a goat. Historians still argue how restful medieval sleep actually was. Some think people just accepted the discomfort and powered through. Others believe the constant interruptions left generations in a haze of sleepless, low-energy existence. But one thing's clear, we're still chasing the same dream. Peace, comfort, safety, rest. You close your eyes again, and as the first thin light of dawn bleeds through the window shutters, you feel that fleeting moment, the one every person, in every time, has hoped for: a second of silence, a breath without fear, a sleep without sorrow. Maybe tonight, you'll find it, maybe tomorrow. And now, as our journey comes to a close, your breath begins to slow. The straw mattress beneath you fades, the candlelight flickers out, and the murmur of wind through wooden shutters drifts into the hush of your own quiet room. You've seen the harshness of the medieval night, the cold, the noise, the fear, the longing. You've shared your bed with strangers, held a baby close, listened to bells in the dark, and whispered prayers to chase away the unseen. And still, you made it. You carried your body through stone-floored castles and soot-covered huts. You slept beneath stars that didn't care whether you were peasant or prince. And now, wrapped in the quiet hum of this moment, you feel something soft settle in your chest. It's not just sleep returning, it's understanding of how deeply human we all are then and now when the world dims and we lay our heads down. So inhale gently. Let go of the drafty halls, the armor, the scratchy wool. Let them float into the past where they belong. You're safe here, now, in your own time, in your own bed. No bells will wake you, no demons will visit, just the soft rustle of breath and the feeling that at last you can rest. Sweet dreams.